Hello, and welcome to episode number 2 of Why Jonathan Sherman Might Be Guilty of Murder. An update here with regards to the reasons as to why he might be guilty. I've gone into specifics and listed about 70 reasons, and these aren't, um, you know, red-handed reasons, right? It's not that we're saying that Jonathan was there that night necessarily, but there's a circumference here, there's a tertiary circle that you have to look at and focus on in order to say all of these items might add up to Jonathan being guilty. And again, none of this is me and coming out and stating these as a fact, but more so I'm just reviewing what other people have posted and then line them up to try to create some sort of consistency here within the story. So here's my go. And what I found really interesting in the first part was that Jonathan Sherman was never willing to answer questions from reporters. It took Kevin Donovan 3 years to be able to have a sit down with Jonathan. And why is that? And not only that, but the sit down had to be perfected. And I'm sure that Jonathan had all the questions and therefore answers prepared while Kevin was on his way up there. Now, what about the public media aspect of Jonathan Sherman not utilizing the media to improve his chances of solving the crime, right? I would imagine that if, I had touched on this in the first video, but I would imagine that if my parents were killed, I would probably be out there in the media trying to utilize the media to my advantage to make sure that Jonathan Sherman, as an individual, a son, a loving person, I would make sure that me as Jonathan would be able to leverage the media, get the word out there, share insights. But instead, Jonathan looked at the media as an issue, a potential problem. He hid behind the coattails of security and ensuring that he wasn't actually going to be harmed because of anything he would put out there in the media. So notice that, right? Everything becomes centralized around Jonathan. That's the ongoing theme here. He didn't want to be in front of the media because he was fearful of his life, which is odd. Number 3, the police state the estate files are actually a big part of the investigation. So you know what that means. Well, if the estate files are a big part of the investigation, well, you would imagine that the suspect rests within those estate files. And when you look at the predominance of Jonathan Sherman and the estate files, his name would be popping up all over those files, I'm sure. So Jonathan is the leader within these estate files, and he is also the one that's in charge of overseeing the transfer of wealth to the kids. He sits on the boards that make sure and advise that the money is allocated properly. And also, nobody's coming out right now to say and protect him and side with him when it comes to him being culpable in these murders. Number 4, he looked very sketchy at the funeral. I noticed that when he was speaking and giving his eulogy, he was doing a lot of rotating head action. And I think that means that he was fearful that, he might be whisked away off the stage. Not only that, though, he's there with the family members, right? Mary Sheckman, the sister of Honey, was there. And I noticed that she wasn't on the stage with Jonathan. And I would imagine that he was a little fearful of being around her should he be, guilty of murder. He was a little fearful of being around her, which I found to be very interesting. Number 5, the killer had intimate knowledge of the house. Again, we've spoken about this before, but the camera not working in the pool, somebody needed to know that. The layout of the house, somebody knew the areas of the house where people were entering, for example, right? If the theory is that Barry came in after driving his car into the garage, came in through that side door that leads from the garage to that basement sort of corridor that leads to the pool area, they would have had to have known that, right? So the layout must have been familiar. And also, there was no sign of forced entry as well. The financial indebtedness, number 6, the financial indebtedness between Jonathan and Barry. Essentially, Barry asked Jonathan for $50 to $60 million just months before he was killed. And here we have Jonathan stating in emails that he'd actually like to borrow more money from Barry. And what that means to me is that there was no chance that Jonathan was listening and understood the need and the necessity for Barry to have this money back. He really did feel like the purse strings were his and his to control. And no matter what Barry needed or wanted, there was no way that he was getting it back. Who asked for $6.25 million on top of the 50 to 60 million that is Barry is asking for in return. And Barry wanted that money right away. Number 7, Jonathan had fired Jack Kay from Apotex. Why is that? Is it because he couldn't face his lifelong friend anymore? I would imagine that Jonathan's not showing up at Apotex on a daily basis. The company is being run by internal people that have been there for years. But Jack Kay was fired. And he was fired during that transition period, right? So the idea being that you let go of somebody that Barry would have never have let go. And why? Because he was in your face telling you that this is the wrong thing to be doing. Putting Apotex up for sale, not having a succession plan, not allowing the employees of Apotex to be comfortable and feel confident that they're going to be okay going forward. These are the things that Barry wanted. He wanted to make sure that everyone was protected and that there was some sort of succession plan in place. But here we have Jonathan moving in, clearing house, and setting ablaze essentially a situation where he could then just sell the company. And again, he probably couldn't face Jack Kay because Jack Kay was the one that was questioning him. Jonathan removed Mary Sherman, Honey's sister, from a storage unit in Ajax. You can see it along the 401. I see it often when I drive by. But the green storage Ajax location, Mary had a gifted unit that was given to her by Barry. And after Barry's death, Mary Sherman was guided out of this unit. And Jonathan was there that day. And Jonathan's rebuttal to that was, it's a tough time for everybody right now. You know, how is it that it's a tough time for everybody in those moments, and yet you're willing to kick out Honey's sister? Why are you allowing the walls to crumble around you, Jonathan? Well, I would imagine it's because you can't face anybody, and you're tired of it. So I think that there's something to be said about the issues with the storage unit and kicking Mary out. That's a big problem. Number 9, Jonathan's own sister, Alex. She too thinks he's guilty. That one was really, really interesting to me because once you have a family member believing that you're guilty of murder, they are actually conveying to the rest of the world the things that we don't see. And what that is are the interactions between her and Jonathan, the sentiment that she feels that Jonathan has after the murders occurred, the way that Jonathan is controlling everything she's not on side with. Alex is actually the one that shut down the murder investigation that was held by the private investigators and asked that they ship all of the information to the police. And the reason why they had to do that is because there was evidence leading up to the fact that Jonathan was the one that killed his parents or had something to do with it. So to me, it's very telling if Alex thinks this, and we should pay very close attention to that. Jonathan literally said that Jack Kay probably had something to do with the killing. Number 10. So again, Jonathan illustrating that he is trying to push everyone that Barry loved away from his life. Not only his life, but he's trying to paint them as evil. He did it with so many other people, right? And that's going to come up more in the future. But the idea being that if you're having an issue because you're guilty, you no longer remain friends with these people. It's like the staircase murder and with Michael Peterson, right? Look at the relationships around him. Other than the kids that believed that he was innocent, look at the relationships around him with the sister of his wife, the daughter, the biological daughter of his wife, right? Those relationships, they crumble. And so we always have to look towards the people that are closest to these potential suspects. We always have to look at their actions. And if the people that are close to them, if they're being regarded in a negative manner and being pushed out to the periphery by the killer or by people that are connected to the killer and they're not able to have sort of conversations and lead a normal life together, if there's disruption within those relationships, we got to look at that. And very clearly we see disruption between Jack Kay and Jonathan. Brad, Alex's husband, he sits on the Sherman Estates trustee, and Alex, Jonathan's sister, as we mentioned, thinks that Jonathan is guilty. But it's interesting to note that Brad wants nothing to do with Jonathan as well. But they both sit on this trustee board together, and that must be really complicated. So here's more to that relationship with Brad and Jonathan and how it connects to Alex's sentiment. You know, Brad sees the way that Jonathan interacts within these meetings, right? Alex doesn't see that, Brad's wife. But Brad would obviously be reporting back to Alex saying, you know, this is how he's acting. And again, just another notch, another piece of grain that, sways public opinion, I think, towards the fact that Jonathan's culpability is likely. Another thing, number 13, he literally said, "You will not find inconsistencies in my answers when speaking to Kevin." Wouldn't a guilty person use that term? So he says to Kevin, "You will not find inconsistencies." Inconsistencies of what? You only say that if you feel that you are guilty and know that you're guilty. What are you, rehearsing and practicing as if you're going for a Broadway play here? No. Inconsistencies comes from preparations, right? Like inconsistency as a statement, you would only say that if you have prepared your statements. Honesty, free of guilt, integrity, all of those things don't have preparation. They come from here, right? So again, Jonathan saying some terms that are making him look extremely guilty. Number 14, the $125 million debt has been repaid, and Jonathan gloats about this, yet it was only paid back as blood money. So if you know what I mean, that debt that Jonathan Sherman had, whether it was 125 million, 200 million, he spoke to Kevin Donovan as in like, "Hey, by the way, those debts are all cleared." But those debts would not be paid back if Barry was still alive. And this is the problem. Jonathan is trying to say that it wasn't indebtedness that led him to this path of murder, potentially. But that doesn't make sense, right? You can't speak about the indebtedness being cleared, but it only being cleared because somebody had died. Barry had died. So he got the money, but he was able to give money back. That doesn't make any sense. I'd love to hear what Alex has to say about that fact. Number 15, Jonathan had issues with his mom. He claims that there were early on issues with his mom. And I find that interesting that he would say that. Your mother is gone and is no longer here. And for you to speak in that manner, to drop shame on her name, it's upsetting. And I think kind of gently persuades us to think, oh, is he saying that there was an issue there and his mom wasn't necessarily the nicest person in the world? And that might be the reason why he did it. I don't know. Just asking questions. Jonathan removed emails from the thread he shared with Kevin Donovan. So before this interview that they had on December 12th, I believe it was, maybe the 17th, but the interview that they had just before that, there was a thread of emails that was sent from Jonathan to Kevin. And you can clearly see that the responses, nothing adds up. They're not all connected. There's pieces missing. And what do you think is probably missing? Well, pieces that point to the indebtedness, pieces that point to how mad Jonathan is, pieces that point to how mad Barry is, all to make it seem like things were calm. But the reality is, they aren't. So again, pieces are missing. Kevin's a professional. He knows these things. And if you're trying to hide and remove emails from a thread, it's just going to make you look more guilty. You might as well just be honest or not send the emails at all. Number 17, he treats the money that Barry was asking back for as non-essential, right? Barry brought it up repeatedly and he needed the money ASAP. And I briefly touched on this before, but what I didn't mention was that Jonathan literally did nothing. Barry was asking for mortgages to be done and created so that he could get the 50 to 60 million back, and Jonathan did nothing to make sure that happened. They just sat back. Supposedly, Adam Paulin went to the banks and checked in on things, but nothing was really done. Jonathan wasn't pushing and striving to get this money back for his dad, because he's a little bit entitled, I guess, right? So, pointing towards, yet again, a reason that maybe Jonathan was a part of this murder. You don't go and get mortgages when you know that you're going to be a part of a murder, right? You don't need to go get those mortgages because you know what you're doing next. And it would be a waste of time to go get the mortgages. Number 18, Adam Paulin is not speaking to anyone. And Jonathan pretty much is muzzled him tightly, right? So Adam Paulin being the green storage partner, being a partner in several other ventures, such as the cottages up in the northeast area. It's along sort of the Highway 115 northeast. And all of these business ventures have led to probably a very tight relationship. We haven't heard anything from Adam. Muzzled. Next, it is obvious that Jonathan saw himself as the heir to the family fortune above all else. he completely disregarded the success that Barry had. He almost made it seem like he was the reason for Barry's success. And Barry even had to let him know, hey, I think I've made some pretty good decisions. Although there was turmoil, I've made some pretty good decisions to get us this far. And it's just very odd how Jonathan speaks to him. There was actually an argument that they had where Jonathan says he is the heir apparent to the Sherman fortune, right? He is the heir apparent to the Sherman fortune. And he's telling this to Barry, right? So there's heated moments going back and forth. And there seriously must be an entitlement feel for Jonathan along the way. He feels that all of this money is his, and there's not going to be anything that gets in his way. And it comes across that way very clearly. Next, his math on the money was wrong, right? So Kevin calculated 200 million. Jonathan says it was 125 million. So again, discrepancies in the indebtedness to try to make it seem like there wasn't as much of a need to kill somebody in order to clear the indebtedness. $75 million difference is a heck of a lot of money. So again, Jonathan downplaying the financial situation. And the fact that he's lying about all of this, really does lead you down that path as to, wait a second, if he's lying about all the financial information, it's got to be because of the finances, right? Hello? Next, I've got number 22 here. There were lots of fights between Jonathan and his father, especially at the time of death. Tons of fights. You can see it. Lots of emails back and forth. There were some serious issues here. And let's reflect on that statement that I made in the other video where Jonathan tried to make it seem like his dad was crazy and was unable to control the family finances. This is just disgusting behavior. Next, the positioning of the bodies suggests the killers knew the actual the victims. It certainly does, because there's a bit of a history in the way that they were placed. Obviously with the folded legs, looking like it was the statue, of course, in the basement nearby. But there was a setup there. There was a level of care. So there might be a connection. Next, it's most likely that somebody had a key, right? We mentioned that there was no forced entry. Of course, the door, it could have been unlocked. There has been mention of them leaving doors unlocked. But it is potential that these killers had a key. Both parents were killed in order to control the fortune, right? So some people are saying that this was a business issue, right? Somebody in business, he had many enemies, right? But in business, if it's a retaliatory action, you probably just take it against Barry, right? Because killing both, you're actually impacting the whole family. And Honey probably survives if it's a business retaliatory measure. But the reality is, this is for control of the fortune. And to control the fortune, you sadly have to kill both parents, right? So let's not look at it as a business vendetta anymore. Let's understand that this is about the fortune and controlling the fortune, okay? Barry's hopes for Apotex were to keep it going, right? He wanted great leadership in place. And firing Jack Kay was the complete opposite of this. Next, Apotex was up for sale within 3 months of the murder. Why? That's not at all what Barry's plans were. Again, all about getting the money, right? And Barry even said previously, close to his death, he said, I want this company to live on for at least 15 years under his name. He doesn't want to sell. Jonathan also used the succession planning discussions with Barry as a way to receive more money from him, instead of genuinely being interested in taking Apotex over. So he's setting up meetings talking about succession planning. But in those meetings, he's actually using the time to try to get more wealth for himself. A bit disgusting. Jonathan shows too many signs of greed to refrain from calling him the killer, right? Too many signs of greed. Promised to help Barry's and Honey's foundation, but is yet to follow up on those commitments. He only made one ridiculous demand to build a $50 million hockey arena that was shut down by Alex and the other kids. Never happened. But that foundation that he spoke of helping out to honor his parents, and he said that in the eulogy, he's done literally nothing. It actually looks like all these foundations that Jonathan's setting up since, well, they're actually only used just to store money within, right? There's no activity. There's no action. They're not actually helping people from what I see online. And also, again, back to the $6.25 million that Adam Paulin and Jonathan asked from Barry just before the death. Literally asked for that money just before his death, even though Barry said he was having financial difficulties, right? It's just so disgusting. He's only talking to Kevin Donovan right now. This is next, number 29, to save face for himself. Let that sink in, right? He's only using the media to help himself, right? So again, greed, selfishness, trying to use things to make himself stand above others, right? So the fact that he's now embracing Kevin Donovan and doing so, it's actually only to clear his name. And he says this. He's like, hey, I need to, I want to give you the facts, right? And the reality is, no, you just want to control, contrive, and deceive. And it's not working. It actually, I think that interview made you come across as even more guilty. Sorry, Jonathan. The killer must have had intimate knowledge about their schedule, right? The random business meeting at the office at the end. Like, the timing of this murder, you must have had some sort of knowledge of their schedule because they had an end of day business meeting. They weren't going to be home until later. And not only that, Honey and Barry were arriving at separate times. So there must have been some sort of connection to their schedules, suggesting an intimate link. Okay? 31. Again, nobody's coming to Jonathan's defense from within the tight circle of Barry's friends and family. Not happening. Nobody's doing it. 32. He tends to only focus on his need for safety instead of solving the crime, right? Only putting his need ahead of solving the crime. You would have talked to Kevin Donovan previously if you truly wanted to solve the crime. It bothered him, he said, when I wrote in the book about the Sherman killings that he owned a high-end electric vehicle and flew first class. Hello, wouldn't it bother you that he was kind of calling you a murderer, Jonathan? Wouldn't you think that that would be an important aspect? Why are you worried about him talking about your cars? Shouldn't you be more worried about the fact that he's calling you a murderer? 34. Paulin has not responded to requests for interviews. Now, the reason that he's not responding to requests is because he's obviously got some insight and information to share, and he's not allowed to. And I feel bad for Adam Paulin in many regards because he's clearly Jonathan's whipping boy and the financial brain. And it's too bad. Hopefully there's going to be a time when Adam comes out and mentions a few things and gives us the full financial detail, right? He obviously has the financial details that we need to have. As a request from his father to repay the 50 to 60 million, Jonathan tells me that my questions are making a lot more of that request. So it's interesting, right? So Jonathan's having a conversation with Kevin. They're talking about the 50 to 60 million that Barry asked back. And now Jonathan's saying, oh, no, you're making that out to be a big deal. It wasn't. Meanwhile, Barry was emailing constantly asking for the money. And not only that, it's another example of Jonathan showing and downplaying the whole money aspect, right? Always doing that, which I find very interesting. 36. When Jonathan gets information, he says he passes it on to the police. Recently, the lead detective on the Sherman case, Detective Sergeant Brandon Price, visited Jonathan personally and received a package of information that he says was uncovered by Jonathan. So Jonathan is playing private investigator, son, and suspect, I guess. But Jonathan is actually putting all these details together and then, feeding them over to Sergeant Price. But what I found really interesting is that, he's only just leading the murder investigators. That's all he's doing. He's leading them down the path that he hopes vindicates him. 37. In his interview with Kevin Donovan, Jonathan says, I don't know anyone who can plan a murder in 3 weeks, but I can tell you I was not involved. Wow, what a weird thing to say. Nobody ever said that the murder was planned in 3 weeks. Perhaps you planned it in 6. How does he know how long the murder takes to plan? And then extremely odd that he would use the word plan, right? So plan. So are you telling us that there was some form of planning? I believe that this type of murder could be planned in a week. Maybe it didn't take 3 weeks, and you sounded so confident in saying 3 weeks because it didn't take you 3 weeks, but there is potential that it took you 1 week. So, 38. He says, Detective Sergeant Brandon Price, who leads the homicide probe, is very professional, and when they spoke recently, Price did not reveal what direction police were focusing their efforts on. As in, every time I ask Sergeant Price for information about the case, he never gives it to me. We know what you're saying, bud. We can read between the lines. You are desperate for the sergeant to give you information, right? And the only way you can get that information, you feel, is by sharing your information and then asking him questions. So really what you mean by calling Sergeant Price professional, really what you mean is he won't budge and give me the details I need to know so that I can try to clear my name from this because I know Sergeant Price is trying to get me. We get it. And Jonathan tells Kevin, I can tell you I was not involved. He told the paper regarding the killings, as in, I hired somebody else to do it. Okay, maybe you weren't directly there, but you might have hired somebody to do it. 39. Jonathan says there was a rift between his mom and Fred, his husband. Again, shaming his mom's legacy. 40. He tried to get his sisters to deem Barry incompetent. We kind of touched up upon that as a part of other pieces. But the reality is, that was way back in 2015. And there was so much more that happened since then, all leading up to entitlement for Jonathan. 41. Jonathan has never understood that it was not his money to play around with, right? He keeps playing around with other people's money, claiming that it's his almost. Very strange. Very strange. 42. The fragmented relationships, all of them. Death should be create bonds, but literally, there are so many fragmented relationships here. The kids don't see each other, the aunts, uncles, nobody sees anybody, and it's a shame. And that all must come from the issues within, sprouting from the potential of Jonathan being part of this murder. 43. All of the other potential suspects have been ruled out by Kevin Donovan. Carrie Winter, for example, right? He had that discussion with Carrie Winter at the diner, and he could see in Carrie Winter's face that he was as innocent as apple pie. There was no way that Kevin Donovan would say these things at the end of an interview unless he really felt them. And I would trust Kevin Donovan's opinion. But it's really interesting about this situation with Jonathan. He goes in for the interview, but he doesn't vindicate him at the end. From day one, Jonathan was trying to steer the investigation and potential suspects. According to the ITOs, Jonathan Sherman told police his parents were complicated people and that there are people out there who would have a grudge against them and would have a reason to hurt them. So yet again, another way for Jonathan to try to steer blame. 46. Jonathan has alien everybody in his path. 47. Everything has to be on Jonathan's terms. So true. 48. Jonathan was dropped as a board member of Kayleen and Lauren's charities before 2020, suggesting they too might think he is guilty. 49. Jonathan was never included whatsoever in Alex and Brad's foundation. 50. Jonathan fights tooth and nail to seal all documents related to the case, which also happen to be embedded in the case. Why is he always trying to hide and control the situation, right? The Fred and Jonathan Sherman and Family Foundation has not done much by way of helping the community, it seems. Jonathan is keeping an extremely low profile instead. 52. Jonathan has created several charities, foundations, and businesses since 2018 started, and none of them seem to be doing much to help people. 53. Jonathan had just returned home from Japan, so was not out of the country at the time. He was there. Oddly enough, he says he learned how to trade cryptocurrency while he was there in Japan. You don't need to go to Japan to learn about crypto. Is that how you paid the killer? Was it through crypto? A little bit harder to track that, but my understanding is CRA might have a path on that. 54. Jonathan had the most lavish lifestyle of all the kids and was clearly in financial trouble with the demand for $6.25 million while Barry was asking for the 50 to 60 million. He was in a financial dire strait and he needed to do something about it. 55. When the family convened at Alex's house Friday evening, Jonathan entered the home wailing and crying, but it actually came across as somewhat of a performance, right? And I feel that it was a performance because in the book they mention how he seems to be calm and collected shortly thereafter, right? For the rest of the evening, all of a sudden, he's not wailing. Odd. Jonathan says it was he, and this is a big one for me. Jonathan says it was he who pushed for hiring a private investigator, but it was actually Alex. Jonathan always tries to claim that he was a big part of getting that private investigator team going, but it was actually Alex. And Alex did so because she was speaking to Harry Radomski, and Harry Radomski suggested doing that. Nothing to do with Jonathan, and he had to go along with it. Jonathan Sherman had nothing to do with the idea of announcing the reward of $10 million either. Again, that was Alex. So here we are, Jonathan claiming that he's trying to get these rewards and this private investigator team out there in order to solve this crime. Don't think you're as close to those ideas as you once thought you were. And then 58, create anti-media sentiment. wherever he could. Even as he was reading his eulogy, why would he take that approach instead of embracing the media? After all, Kevin Donovan was partly responsible for the police opening their minds to discussing with private investigators and the Sherman family, right? And the police. So basically, Kevin Donovan wrote an article and it helped link the police to the private investigators, got that conversation to open up. Wouldn't you think that Jonathan would be happy that that happened? Wouldn't you think that Jonathan would maybe owe Kevin Donovan some sort of a conversation to say thank you? No, he's terrified of Kevin Donovan. And now he's having these meetings and these interviews with Kevin Donovan to try to save face because he feels like the walls are closing in. 59. Barry was striking Jonathan down in all of his efforts in business near the end of his life. Literally, lots of things were being shut down. 60. Someone that Barry loved, Frank D'Angelo, was not invited to the funeral at the request of Jonathan. Another slight. Why? Barry obviously would have wanted Frank there. 61. Barry was in financial distress only because the money was tied up in the business. The only way for the money to be actually turned into cash was if the business was sold. Interesting to note that Apotex had plans of expansion before Barry was murdered. And combine that with the fact that Jonathan was demanding more money from Barry, it seems there was only one thing that Jonathan could do to get more cash. Kill his dad and his mom, then sell Apotex. 62. Only a close person to the family could have known about the cameras in the pool not working. 63. Jonathan is desperate to be as close as possible to the police investigation. He hired Robert Seaton, a U.S. lawyer that had solid connections to the police force. Why would he do that? Well, those solid connections he's trying to milk, right? He needs that information. I'm just hoping that Sergeant Price is not telling anybody anything. He really does need to have his finger on the pulse of everything, right? 64. He constantly reports back to the police when Kevin Donovan asks him questions, as if to say, Kevin, the scope is on you, not me. Literally, he sent him an email at the end of this interview that Kevin did with him and said, oh, by the way, I let the police and updated them I updated the police on our conversation. Kevin's like, that was a bit weird. Why would you do that? 65. Jonathan downplays his attempt to declare his father incompetent. He tells Kevin that it was just a poke at Barry. Yet again, downplaying, a poke at Barry, not real, downplaying the money, downplaying the relationships. So much downplaying. Why? 66. He literally tried to make it an alibi by taking a photo of his hand on the Wednesday evening, including a handwritten note with a time on it. Who would ever do that unless they needed to separate themselves from the scene at a specific time? What? Hey, I'm going to go outside tonight, take a photo of my hand with my house in the background with a handwritten note that kind of just lets you know, hey, I wasn't near the murder scene. What? Crazy. That, to me, is somebody trying to cover their tracks. 67. Kevin Donovan read banking and loyalty plans records. And my second and third challenges. Police and the courts refused to release even generic information, stating that the new warrants were too specific and if released could alert the murderer or murderers. Jonathan was the only one to recently go on a trip. Is that a connection? So if you're getting all the loyalty rewards information, well, Jonathan went away. Maybe there's a connection to him there. 68. More of the Jonathan Sherman implicating everybody else but himself. He has attempted to force me to choose between not honoring our family's commitment not to discuss our parents' murder publicly, or suffering the consequence of making no comment, to what I can only term are his insane accusations that I am implicated in the murder of my parents. Sherman said that he believes that the people I have spoken to, and who provided me with the information on which I base my questions, are people who we believe to be persons of interest in the murder of my parents. Well, Jonathan, maybe if you would put your parents ahead of yourself for once, you wouldn't be in that predicament. 69. Jonathan has started a few new companies since the death of his parents. Harlow Capital, for example. None of them would have been possible without the seed money from the deaths of his parents. So he's really taking advantage of this new situation and this newfound wealth that he has. 70. It's odd that Jonathan was right into entrepreneur mode right after the death of Barry and Honey Sherman. He got right into cryptocurrency. He got right into cryptocurrency with a company called CoinSmart. He got right into finances with Harlow Capital. He, I'm sure, is injecting money into his cottages, into all these business ventures that he has. And really, I appreciate you, sitting and listening to me kind of blab on about this. But those are my 70 points as to why Jonathan Sherman might be culpable. Again, these are just reviews of what other people stated. And I find it to be problematic. I think that we need to have the truth in this case. It is very obvious that somebody close to him, somebody that needed the money, did this. It was an execution for control of finances, nothing to do with the businesses. So, hey, happy researching. I hope you're all doing wonderful. And thanks for your patience on this next video. And I look forward to talking to you again soon. Take care. Bye-bye.